What kind of family builds a house, seals its doors, and chooses to live not inside but beneath it? Not rats, not moles, not fugitives, but men, women, and children. A lineage known only as the Drevlin family. For 50 years, the neighbors never once saw them step through their front door. The house itself was a shell, a mask, and beneath it, something stirred. Now listen carefully, because what you're about to hear was never meant for you. There's a reason no one tells this story in the open. You're not supposed to know what they built, what they whispered, or what they fed in the dark. The Drevlin family is not just a tale of eccentric hermits. Their choice to live beneath the ground was not preference. It was pact. You see, history likes to polish its surface. Official records give you names, dates, deeds, but beneath those pages is a shadow text, a black ledger of hidden survival, ancient debts, and forbidden appetites. The Drevlin story lives there, in margins, in whispers, in the silences between lines. To step into their history is not simply to learn, it is to descend. And once you descend, you do not rise back unchanged. Think about it. When you build a house, what are you doing? You are claiming dominion over a piece of earth, raising walls, setting boundaries. But the Drevlin house was different. It had no bedrooms, no kitchen, no hearth, only an entrance hatch. The home was never meant to shelter them. It was meant to hide them, to keep your eyes fixed on a hollow shell while life happened below, out of sight, out of reach, out of memory. Do you understand the power of that choice? They inverted the ritual of settlement. Instead of conquering the land above, they burrowed into the soil like returning to a womb. And men who return to the womb are not looking for safety. They are looking for transformation. Locals said the Drevlins dug until the earth grew warm, unnaturally warm, until even worms refused to cross that threshold. What does that tell you? They weren't digging for storage. They were digging for a boundary, a threshold between the ordinary world and something else. Every few years, workers were summoned. Carpenters, masons, plumbers. Paid in coins no bank recognized, coins stamped with faces of monarchs that history books claimed had long since faded. The workers were warned, repair from above only, never under any condition descend below, and the ones who ignored that order did not live long enough to finish their stories. One man, a mason, lifted a hatch and looked down. His boast ended in choking silence, his body collapsing within the year, buried with no priest, no words, no witnesses. If you're paying attention, you'll recognize this as a pattern. Every society has stories of the ones who peered too far into the forbidden. They never return intact. Because knowledge has weight, some truths collapse the human frame. Now ask yourself this: why would a family abandon sunlight, air, and the gaze of their neighbors to embrace perpetual darkness? What debt was being paid? What hunger was being fed? The official story is famine, the Black Winter. Entire villages starved. And yet the Drevlin lineage endured, not through farming, not through trade, but through withdrawal. They sealed themselves underground, and the silence around what they ate during those years is louder than any admission. Their estate agent admitted something else. The original blueprints contained no ordinary rooms, only an entrance hatch, nothing else. The surface house was a costume, a mask of normalcy stretched across the face of a void. And when a void is cultivated long enough, it begins to call things. In the county archives, an old surveyor's map revealed a cavernous absence beneath their land, a hollow stretching not just under the house, but beneath neighboring plots, beneath the very street. A subterranean black lung breathing under the town itself. Imagine that, while children played above, while farmers worked their fields, while clerks tallied taxes, a hidden family thrived in corridors beneath their feet. Every conversation you had, every dream you muttered in your sleep, may have been overheard by ears pressed to stone. Some nights, faint amber light bled through the floorboards, like molten breath rising from the earth's lungs. And if you pressed your ear against the wood, you heard them. Conversations in no known tongue. Words bent around the edges of language, syllables shaped like hunger. What language survives 50 years without witnesses, spoken only underground? Not one meant for trade, not one meant for neighbors, but one meant to bind. Children dared each other to whisper their names into the keyhole of the front door. And what came back chilled their blood. their names repeated perfectly, mimicked from beneath the floor. Do you see it? That is more than echo. That is possession. Something catching hold of your identity, turning it over, trying it on. If you understand psychology, you'll recognize the mechanism. To strip a man of his name, to mimic it, to bend it back toward him. It's the first step in erasing who he is. A shadow identity whispered back at you until you no longer know if you are yourself, or an echo of the thing that learned to wear your name. This is where our descent begins. Not in a house, not in a famine, but in a choice. A family deciding to invert the ritual of living, to abandon light, to clothe themselves in soil and secrecy. And for what? To survive? To bind themselves to forces no one else dared acknowledge? The truth is this: the Drevlins were not hiding from the world. The world was being hidden from them. And you're about to find out why. Beneath every myth lies a ritual. Beneath every ritual lies a bargain. And beneath every bargain lies blood. The Drevlin family knew this. That is why they dug first and built second. Because to live underground is not only to reject the world above, it is to pledge yourself to the world beneath. You must understand, the earth is not silent. Men in suits and ties may scoff, but soldiers who have dug trenches will tell you the ground speaks. Miners in shafts will tell you the stone hums. Indigenous shamans will tell you the soil remembers. The Drevlins weren't the first to hear it, but they were among the few who obeyed. When they dug into that strange warmth, they weren't carving a basement, they were breaching a threshold. The soil shifted under their hands, alive in a way that frightened even the worms. And instead of stopping, they kept going. Why? Because once you hear the murmur beneath the earth, you either flee in terror, or you answer it. And they answered. Neighbors whispered that the Drevlins were reverse settlers, but the truth is darker. They were initiates, not of any church, not of any kingdom, but of the soil itself. Their underground halls were no accident of survival. They were chambers arranged like an inverted cathedral, floors stacked downward, each level deeper, each room further away from the sky. What kind of architecture mirrors a descent into hell itself? One designed for communion. Every so often, a tradesman was called to the estate, paid in coins stamped with forgotten kings, coins that collectors swore were authentic, but historians denied ever existed. This detail matters, because when payment is given in dead currencies, it means the family's economy was not tethered to time. They were transacting in a different order of reality, one that had no need for your Federal Reserve or your gold standard. Their wealth was not material, it was generational pact. One man broke the rule. He opened the hatch and peered down. He lived only long enough to choke, stammer, and die without telling what he saw. Understand this. Death by silence is worse than death by violence, because violence at least leaves wounds. Silence leaves only absence, the kind that spreads like infection. But what's more unsettling is not the dead mason. It is the children. Children in town who whispered their names into the Drevlin keyhole, and the names came back, perfectly mimicked, syllable by syllable, in a voice that was not their own. Do you know the terror of hearing your identity repeated back to you, but hollow, stretched, inverted? That is not prank. That is psychological erasure. To mimic a name is to claim it. That is the oldest rule of sorcery, the most primal law of control. And the Drevlins, or whatever they served, were perfecting it beneath the house. Now think of this not as folklore, but as system. The family thrived for generations without sunlight, without farms, without trade. The famine that consumed villages above never touched them. How? The official records say nothing, but silence itself is admission. Because if they did not grow food, if they did not buy it, and yet they lived, then something else was feeding them. And the earth remembers. When later generations of townsfolk pressed the estate agent, he admitted the original building plans contained nothing of comfort. No parlor, no hearth, only the hatch. A single opening in the center of the floor like an altar. What is an altar but a mouth? And what is a mouth but an opening that demands to be fed? Do you begin to see it? The house was never for living. It was a mask placed over a mouth, a stage set designed to hide the real theater below. And the actors in that theater were not merely the Drevlins. Something else performed with them. A surveyor's map confirmed it, a void beneath the property wider than the estate itself, a black reservoir of absence stretching into neighboring plots. How do you measure a hole that refuses to be mapped? You don't. The land itself erases your measurements. Compasses spin, distances warp. That is not soil. That is memory turned against the living. The whispers spoke of conversations in no known language. Not German, not Latin, not Slavic. No philologist could place the syllables, yet neighbors swore the cadence carried meaning, an order, a structure, a rhythm too deliberate to be nonsense, a tongue older than trade, older than law. What language is that? It is the language of debt, and debts of that scale are never paid in coin. Now ask yourself, how deep must a family descend before they no longer belong to the surface world? How many generations must live in shadow before their eyes widen, their skin pales, their voices take on a subterranean resonance? Evolution doesn't take millennia when ritual accelerates it. Transformation can occur in a single lifetime if the pact is deep enough. One milkman swore he saw a Drevlin step above ground, a thin man in an outdated coat, eyes too wide for his face, pupils adapted to darkness thicker than night itself. The milkman recanted, said he imagined it, but he also changed his route and never passed the estate again. That is what guilt looks like. He saw truth, but truth carried weight, and he fled. The Drevlin family became shadows in documents. Property always paid for, taxes always current, yet no hand ever signed. Envelopes were passed through gaps in the floor. Currency slid outward, silence pulled inward. It was as if the family's very existence was a negotiation. We will honor your laws, but you will not see our faces. And still the neighbors heard the sound, a faint tapping from below, rhythmic, deliberate, not digging, not hammering, something older. Fingernails against stone, coded signals transmitted upward. A boy claimed it was a message, but every time he tried to decode it, the tapping stopped the moment he stepped outside, though that is not coincidence. That is surveillance. The underground was not only alive, it was listening. You see, this is the part of history men are forbidden to face, that the earth itself hosts systems of power we were never meant to govern, that families like the Drevlin did not disappear into madness, but into loyalty, that their silence was not isolation, but obedience, and obedience always has a master. You came here to hear a story of a strange family who lived beneath their house, but you're beginning to realize this is no story. It is a mirror, because the same silence that swallowed them surrounds you. Institutions build shells, polite facades, houses above ground, but beneath every system, something hungers, something watches, something waits. The Drevlins weren't the only ones to answer it. They were only the ones who chose to make their answer permanent. And you, right now, listening, you've already stepped onto their porch. You've pressed your ear to their floor. You've heard the muffled tapping begin. The question is, will you walk away, or will you keep listening? Every hidden practice begins as a survival mechanism, but survival has a way of mutating into domination. The Drevlin family may have entered the ground to escape famine, but once they tasted the silence below, they began using it. They discovered something more valuable than food. They discovered control. Control begins with one principle: erase the visible, cultivate the invisible. The Drevlins erased their house by leaving it empty, a dusty monument to normalcy. Curtains hung in place, oil paintings staring into lifeless rooms, while beneath, voices whispered. Do you see the inversion? The shell satisfied the surface world. The performance lulled the neighbors, but the true life, the true ritual, thrived out of sight. This is the same trick institutions play on you. You see the house, the polished surface, the logo, the smiling faces, the glossy promises, but behind the curtain, below the boards, deeper than your vision dares wander, something else governs. And it does not look like what you are shown. The Drevlins perfected this double existence, and the first tool they wielded was identity. They discovered that to manipulate a man, you do not need to chain his body. You only need to touch his name. Do you remember the children at the door, whispering their names into the keyhole? And the names came back, mimicked, hollow, precise. This was not childish trickery. This was psychological harvesting. Names are not sounds. They are anchors. The moment you hear your name spoken, something inside you responds before you can think. It pulls you inward. And if the sound that comes back is not yours but a shadow, your anchor shifts. You begin to drift. That is how indoctrination works. Not by overt chains, but by echo. Say it back to them until they cannot distinguish their own voice from yours. Parents use it, teachers use it, leaders use it, and the Drevlins had weaponized it long before modern psychology gave it terms. The tapping under the floor was the same method, refined. Not sound, but pattern, codes, rhythms. Do you know why torture survivors sometimes report hearing phantom tapping, phantom dripping long after the event is over? Because repetition brands itself into the nervous system. The Drevlins weren't just speaking below ground, they were transmitting, encoding rhythms into the nervous systems of those above, a primitive form of mass programming. Neighbors spoke of livestock growing restless near the property line, dogs barking at the soil, chickens vanishing without tracks. What frightened them was not predation, it was entrainment. Animals sense frequency before men do. The ground beneath the Drevlins pulsed with vibrations. Not machinery, but organic, uneven, like a living heartbeat. That heartbeat reached the surface. The animals heard it, and then the people did. Imagine living near a house where the ground itself hums through your bones at night. You begin to feel restless, agitated, paranoid. You lose sleep. You make mistakes, and while your body frays, the ones below remain undisturbed. This is psychological warfare without confrontation, control by resonance, control by unseen frequencies. Do you think this belongs only to an eccentric family, or do you recognize the same mechanism in the world around you? Media repeating the same phrases until they become your inner voice. Devices pulsing with invisible signals that you never question. Institutions humming beneath your life, just beneath the threshold of awareness. You feel it in your body, but you dismiss it, just as the townsfolk dismissed the hum beneath the Drevlins. And then there were the documents, taxes paid on time, property owned without question. But never a signature, never a handshake, never a human face. Transactions without bodies. Think of what that means. An entire family mastering the art of presence without presence. They existed only on paper, only in faceless exchanges. They were ghosts in bureaucracy, yet the system still recognized them. This is exactly how hidden power survives today. Corporations that own entire cities but no human face behind them. Shell companies that transfer billions but no man you can confront. Shadows that sign nothing, yet hold your entire livelihood in their grasp. The Drevlins were not unique. They were early adopters. They discovered the secret of disembodied power, and the system rewarded it. The question becomes, who taught them? Because no family develops such methods alone. Children do not simply decide to live beneath the ground, to erase themselves, to weaponize names and frequencies. These were not eccentric habits. These were initiations. Someone, something, showed them the rules, and the Drevlins obeyed. Remember the rainstorm of 1972? Basements across town flooded, but not the houses near the estate. Their water was drawn downward, sucked into cracks, absorbed by an unseen drain. Think about that. Nature itself bent in obedience. Water, the great equalizer, flowing not into rivers, but into the Drevlins' underground and chambers. Do you grasp the scale? They were not simply manipulating people, they were bending elements, drawing sustenance, sound, even geology into their ritual. And still the townsfolk mocked, called it superstition, laughed in taverns. But behind the laughter was unease, because they knew deep down that what thrived beneath the house was not eccentricity, it was mastery, it was system, it was power drawn from the one place the surface world refuses to look. The underworld beneath their feet. And here's the truth no man wants to admit. Every empire you've ever studied, every institution you obey today has a Drevlin chamber beneath it, a hollow where the real work is done. You are meant to marvel at the architecture above, the White House, the Capitol, the cathedral, the skyscraper, but beneath them lie tunnels, archives, vaults, hidden halls where the real conversations happen, where identity is harvested, where obedience is coded, where silence is enforced. The Drevlins were not madness. They were mirror, a small-town reflection of a global truth, that the world is governed not from the visible stage, but from the chambers below. And the longer you listen, the more you realize, you too are already standing above a hatch, already hearing the tapping rise through the floor, already feeling the hum of unseen systems pulse through your bones. The question is not whether the Drevlins lived beneath the house. The question is, what lives beneath yours? History likes to tell you it is complete. Dates, names, kings, wars. But what if I told you that half of history, perhaps more, was intentionally buried? That the Drevlin family wasn't just an isolated curiosity, but a continuation of something far older, far darker, far more deliberate? Let's trace it back. The Drevlins claim descent from settlers, just ordinary immigrants who arrived with little more than hands and hunger. But the records, when you actually look, don't align. Ships' manifests list no Drevlins. Census rolls omit them for decades. It is as though they appeared fully formed, property already in hand, debts already cleared, a house already standing above an invisible cavern. Do you see it? Families don't materialize out of nothing. They are placed. The Drevlins were seeded into the town like a foreign organism introduced into a body. And if they were seeded, that means someone held the seed. Someone carried it across centuries. Scholars of the unspoken call them the hollow bloodlines. Clans that thrive not in visibility, but in secrecy. Families that never quite belong, yet never disappear. They emerge when famine hits, when war strikes, when plague burns the land, and when ordinary men perish. These bloodlines persist. They do not farm, they do not trade, they do not beg. They withdraw, they descend. They eat what you do not name. Think carefully. How many times in history have entire villages vanished, not from fire or sword, but from hunger? Crops fail, neighbors die, yet a single house stands untouched, and when you peer inside, no one answers. But the cellar door is warm, the well is deeper than it should be, and the children whisper names that do not belong to the land. The Drevlins are one chapter of this hidden pattern. In ancient Gaul, records speak of the burrowed ones, families who abandoned their homes to live in the earth, emerging only to collect corpses after battlefields cleared. In Eastern Europe, peasants told stories of the deep keepers who bartered with starving villagers, one son for 7 winters of meat. In the Scottish Highlands, the legend of Sawney Bean tells of a clan that lived in caves, feeding off travelers until entire regions grew silent. Folklore, they say. Exaggeration. But ask yourself, why does every continent, every culture carry the same whisper? Families that live beneath, feed unseen, and endure while others die. My friend, folklore is not fantasy. Folklore is camouflage. The truth hidden in the only place peasants could store it, stories. The Drevlins fit the pattern perfectly. A famine strikes. The town weakens, yet they grow stronger. 50 years later they still walk, pale, hollow-eyed, whispering in tongues no neighbor understands. You think that is coincidence? No, that is ritual continuity. A bloodline passing the script of survival from father to son, from mother to daughter, for generations longer than the county has even existed. Now let me tell you something that the archives do not want you to know. In 1938, a priest named Father Albrecht filed a report, buried deep in diocesan records, that he had been called to the Drevlin estate for what he thought was baptism. A child had been born. He arrived with his book, his water, his prayers, but the family led him not to a crib, not to a nursery, but to the hatch. They asked him to descend. He refused. 3 days later he vanished. His parish notes end mid-sentence, his congregation absorbed into neighboring parishes as if he never existed. And yet, beneath one of his surviving pages, a fragment scrawled in Latin, non baptismus sed pactum, not baptism, but pact. Understand the weight of those words. The Drevlin births were not about welcoming children into faith. They were about binding them to something else, something old, something that required secrecy, submersion, and silence. The forbidden history here is simple. The Drevlins were not inventors, they were inheritors. They carried a ritual older than the soil they dug into, older than the nation itself. The pact was not with neighbors. It was not with kings. It was with what dwells beneath. Now I ask you, why is it that every empire builds downward? Pyramids hollowed with chambers, temples with catacombs, governments with basements and bunkers. Why do men of power always place their true treasures below the ground? Because beneath is where the pact is kept. The Drevlins were not eccentric, they were obedient to the same principle that has bound rulers, priests and kings for millennia. The underworld holds the contract. And the real danger is this: history is written by those who stand in the light. But the contracts that govern your life, your debt, your body, your very name, they are signed in the dark, where you are not allowed to look. The Drevlins were only following the same path. They were just less polished, less hidden, more raw in their devotion. Their bloodline is not gone. It cannot be gone. Because survival cults do not die. They migrate. They shed names like snakes shed skin. Today they are not called Drevlins. But look around you. The quiet family who owns half your street but never attends a gathering. The nameless trust that bought your neighborhood park. The faceless investors whose money controls the air you breathe. Do you think they are strangers? Or do you recognize the echo? The Drevlins were not history. They are continuity. The surface world forgot their name, but the underworld remembers. And now, because you are hearing this, so do you. When you live near rot long enough, you begin to breathe it in. The Drevlins did not need to step above ground to infect their neighbors. Presence itself is a contagion, and soon the entire town began to bear symptoms. It started with the dreams. Ask anyone who lived within a mile of the estate in the late 1950s, and they will tell you of the nights when their sleep fractured. Families reported waking at the same hour, always between 2 and 3 a.m., with the sensation that someone was whispering their name at the foot of their bed. Not shouting, not calling, whispering the way you whisper to someone in a church, careful not to wake what lies deeper. And the most disturbing detail: entire households heard the same dream. Husband, wife and children rising at the same moment, repeating the same name they had heard in the dark. How does a dream synchronize across 3 minds? Unless, of course, it isn't a dream. Unless it is transmission. The Drevlins had discovered how to broadcast beneath consciousness. The rhythms tapped into their floors, the low vibrations pulsing through the soil. These were not accidents. They were signals. And the townsfolk were their receivers. By day, the effects were subtler. Farmers who lived on the edges of Drevlin property found themselves losing track of time. Hours passed without memory. They described standing in fields until the sun burned their skin, tools hanging limp in their hands, their minds blank. Housewives forgot recipes they had cooked for decades. Children wandered home with dirt under their nails, unable to explain where they had been. Identity was eroding. The Drevlins did not need to kill their neighbors. They could hollow them from within. Do you remember the census anomaly of 1964? The town reported a sudden drop in population. Dozens of names missing from the rolls, as though they had never lived there. But there were no corresponding obituaries, no graves, no funerals. People simply ceased to be counted. And yet, when questioned, neighbors hesitated. I think they moved, some muttered. Didn't they have relatives out west? But no letters came. No new addresses. No proof. This was not migration. This was absorption. The Drevlins had perfected the art of erasing people without leaving a mark. First the name is echoed, then it is hollowed, then it is claimed. What is the fastest way to destroy a community? Not fire, not war, not famine. It is the slow unraveling of trust in memory. If you cannot be sure your neighbor existed, if you cannot trust that your child's laugh was real, you begin to fracture. Town meetings grew tense. Petitions circulated demanding the estate be condemned, but no signatures ever stuck. Every time momentum grew, it vanished, as if the ink itself bled away. And then came the children's games. In the 1970s, school teachers began reporting that groups of children were playing a strange variation of hide and seek. They called it the below game. The rules were simple. One child closed their eyes and lay flat on the ground, while the others circled them, whispering names in unison. The child would then rise and wander, eyes still closed, until they pointed at someone. That person had to take their place on the ground. Teachers dismissed it as nonsense, but survivors remember the expressions, Children returning to class, pale, glassy-eyed, repeating the whispers under their breath. Sometimes the same names surfaced again and again, names no one recognized, names that never appeared on any roster. Where do children learn such games? Who teaches them the rules? Understand, this was not play. This was ritual diffusion. The Drevlins did not need to leave their estate. Their influence seeped into the minds of the town's youngest, embedding itself in their laughter, disguising itself as innocence. By the time the adults realized, it was too late. And then, the land itself began to change. Crops closest to the estate grew pale, stunted, yet strangely resistant to disease. The soil tested unusual, less nitrogen, more iron, traces of ash with no apparent fire. Farmers who tilled too close reported nausea, headaches, hallucinations of voices murmuring in the roots. Some swore the corn itself whispered in the wind. Others burned their fields, fearing contagion. But burning did nothing. The soil carried the mark of decades of resonance. Once the underground chamber had pulsed long enough, the ground itself began to carry the memory. The land became an extension of the ritual. And the people who ate from that land, well, they carried the ritual too. You begin to see the toll. The Drevlins didn't just survive underground, they exported their survival into the community above. They fractured sleep, they erased memory, they hollowed names, they infected children's play. They rewrote the soil itself. And the most terrifying truth, none of it required force. They never marched, they never shouted, they never spilled blood in the streets. Their power was quiet, invisible, resonant, and that is why it worked, because no one can fight what they cannot see. This is why whispers of the estate linger even now, not because of ghosts, not because of superstition, but because once a place has been tuned to resonance, it never truly returns to silence. The Drevlins may have gone, the house may have collapsed, but the hum remains, and those who live near it still report the same dreams, the same loss of time, the same whispers at the door. What does that tell you? That contamination does not die with the contaminator. It lingers, it waits, it carries forward through land, through blood, through memory. The Drevlins infected more than a town. They infected a pattern. And if you think that pattern ended there, you are already mistaken, because contamination spreads, always. We comfort ourselves with distance. That was long ago. That was superstition. That was them, not us. But contamination does not obey the boundaries of time. Patterns repeat and methods evolve. What the Drevlins perfected with wood, stone and soil is now mirrored in steel, wire and signal. The family may be gone, but their principles live on, in ways you touch every day without even knowing. Consider the hum. Neighbors spoke of vibrations through the ground, low rhythms that entered their dreams, bent their memories, rewrote their sense of self. Today, what do we surround ourselves with? Constant frequencies, wireless signals, towers broadcasting waves that pass through your body night and day. You do not hear them, but you feel them. Restlessness, sleeplessness, distraction. You wake at odd hours. You lose track of time, scrolling through screens that blink like the Drevlins' whispered names. Are you so sure the methods are different? Or has the ritual simply been mechanized? Look deeper. Identity erasure. The Drevlins made neighbors vanish not with violence, but with paperwork, with silence, with absence. A census that forgets you is as fatal as a knife. Now what do we live in? Databases, registries, digital ledgers that define if you exist or not. Miss one keystroke in a system and your name disappears from the record. No paycheck, no healthcare, no proof of life. You can scream in the street, but if the system says you are not real, then you are not. The Drevlins erased a village. Today, erasure happens with the press of a button. Who holds the button now? And then, contamination through play. The below game the town's children played in the 1970s echoes today in digital form. Do you think it's coincidence that viral challenges spread like ritual chants? That millions of children repeat the same words, the same dances, the same sounds in synchronization across the globe? A child in Ohio whispers "Theko," the same line as a child in Seoul, neither knowing why, both part of the same rhythm. Who writes these rhythms? Who ensures they spread? Who benefits from a generation circling around the same chant? You see it now. The Drevlins were not just a family. They were a prototype. Their underground chamber was an early model of what has now become infrastructure, a test site, and the principles proved so effective they have been scaled up: vibration, erasure, synchronization, contamination. Do you think the great powers of the world ignored such techniques, or do you think they studied them, archived them, built upon them? Ask yourself why government buildings always keep sub-basements no one enters, why corporations buy entire neighborhoods and leave them empty, why old families with no public income stream still own half the land you walk upon. These are not quirks. These are continuities. The Drevlins did not vanish. They were absorbed. Their methods folded into larger systems, their names changed, their rituals disguised. What once was whispered through the floorboards of a farmhouse is now piped through satellites, servers, and screens. Do you doubt it? Then look at your own behavior. How many times this week have you checked your phone without meaning to? How many hours disappeared into feeds you don't remember opening? How many names do you recognize online, half real, half invented, that occupy your mind more than your neighbors do? The Drevlins made you forget who lived next door. Today, you forget yourself, and yet you continue to return, eyes glassy, scrolling, whispering, repeating, exactly as the children did when they lay flat on the ground and circled each other, whispering the names from below. It is the same ritual, only scaled, only polished, only hidden under the veneer of modern life. But here is the key you must hold tight. The Drevlins were not monsters, they were not aberrations, they were obedient, they followed the logic of survival. Withdraw into secrecy, feed unseen, and hollow those above until they forget themselves. They were crude compared to what surrounds you now, but they were the seed, and seeds grow. The hum is louder now, the erasure's swifter, the game's larger, the soil wider. You are already living inside the continuation of their pact, only it no longer bears the Drevlin name. It wears the mask of progress, of technology, of necessity. The question is not whether the Drevlins still exist. The question is, can you tell the difference between a family in a cellar and the system you live in? Because if you cannot, then maybe you are already below. There are stories we repeat for comfort. Ghosts in old houses, vanishing townsfolk, a family line cursed into extinction. These versions are easy, manageable, finished. But the reports that continue, the ones that surface in PTs, police files, hospital notes, and whispered testimonies are not finished. They suggest something harder to face. The Drevlins are not gone. They adapted. Let me tell you how. The investigators who didn't return. In 1982, 2 graduate students from Ohio University set out to document Appalachian folklore. They interviewed locals in the region where the Drevlin estate once stood. Their project notes, later recovered from a motel, detail repeated interviews cut short when townsfolk grew quiet at the mention of the family. The students planned to visit the remains of the farmhouse. They never checked out of that motel. Their car was later found parked at the edge of the woods near the collapsed cellar site. Inside were empty notebooks, pens without caps, and a tape recorder with 30 minutes of silence. The final few seconds contained a faint vibration, like the low hum of a motor, but with no engine nearby. The case remains unsolved. Their families received no remains, only the belongings. What kind of silence takes people whole? The underground sightings. Locals tell of hunters in the 1990s stumbling across openings in the earth, narrow shafts, freshly dug, with steps descending into black. Not official mines, not mapped caves. The openings would be gone days later, covered over, as if the ground had swallowed them back. One hunter described hearing voices beneath him while tracking deer at dusk. Not echoing but coordinated, like chanting, too synchronized to be casual talk. He swore the words weren't English, yet he recognized one repeated name, a surname he knew from the town, though the family had moved away decades earlier. He stopped hunting after that. He refused to walk those woods again. Why chant the name of someone who no longer exists, unless they exist below? The modern disappearances. Between 2003 and 2011, 3 utility workers sent to inspect power lines near the old property vanished. Their trucks were found, doors ajar, equipment scattered. One man's radio was recovered, the last transmission a frantic burst of static punctuated by what sounded like tapping. Precise, patterned, rhythmic. Not random interference. Officials explained it away as accidents, citing unstable ground, wild animals, even weather. But the families received anonymous calls late at night, voices low, repeating their missing loved one's name again and again until the line went dead. Do you see the continuity? The Drevlins didn't vanish. They perfected their old method. Whisper the name, hollow it, claim it. The evidence buried in records hospital files from nearby counties show a peculiar pattern. Individuals admitted for sleep disturbances, claiming they couldn't wake up from layered dreams. Doctors wrote of synchronized symptoms, entire families reporting the same visions. Again and again the content repeats, standing in a narrow hall of stone, hearing a slow pulse in the walls, voices whispering from the dark, calling them by name. One patient drew sketches. At first, just crude diagrams of staircases and tunnels, but then faces began to appear, elongated, pale, with eyes that seemed unfinished, as though the paper could not hold them. Staff dismissed these as delusions, but when one nurse brought the sketches home, her own children began drawing the same faces in their notebooks. The infection still transmits. The question of presence. So, are the Drevlins gone? If you want safety, say yes. Say they were just a sick family, a rural horror story, a collapsed house. But if you listen closely, if you let yourself hear what others will learn, then you notice the same signs repeating. The hum in the ground where no machinery runs. The vanishings that leave no remains, only belongings. The names whispered on telephones with no caller. The tunnels that open and close like wounds. The faces children sketch without knowing why. These are not echoes of the past. These are continuities. The Drevlins learned long ago that survival meant secrecy. They withdrew, yes. But withdrawal does not mean extinction. It means waiting. It means tunneling deeper, not vanishing. It means spreading roots where eyes cannot follow. And if a family can survive for generations underground, what makes you think they could not survive into now? The Drevlins are not gone. They are below. Always below. And when the hum grows loud enough, when the rhythm aligns, when your name slips from your mouth in a dream, then you will understand. Because you were never above. You were always theirs. You followed their trail through soil and silence, through archives and whispers, through hums in the ground and erasures in records. You've seen the signs that repeat across centuries, wearing new masks each time. But here is the part no one warns you about. Once you learn their pattern, it learns you, the attention that watches back. Every page you read, every note you take, every moment you linger on the Drevlins, you repeat their ritual. Theirs was always an economy of attention, whispers in the dark that fed on listening ears. To investigate them is to invite them. To name them is to let them answer. Think back. As you read these words, did you hear anything shift in your room? Did you catch yourself pausing, listening, wondering if a faint vibration was real? That pause was not yours. It was theirs. The silence you carry. Ask yourself, when was the last time you slept without waking in the dark, heart racing, unsure why? When was the last time you walked a hallway at night and didn't feel the air change, as if someone stepped just out of sight? These are not random feelings. They are rehearsals. The Drevlins rehearsed them for you centuries ago. You've carried them longer than you know the disappearance of self. Remember how their neighbors vanished, not in body, but in identity, forgotten by records, erased from names, lost in silence. That method is already here inside you. How many times this week have you forgotten why you walked into a room? How many times have you scrolled through an endless feed and realized an hour had vanished? How many times have you lost yourself only to surface, unsure of what was taken? That is not coincidence. That is their signature. The Drevlins erase from within before they erase from without. The whisper you will hear when their neighbors lay flat and whispered names. They did not invent that game. They obeyed it. They repeated what was fed into their minds at night, what hummed beneath their floorboards, what grew louder the more they ignored it. And so you will too. Not yet, perhaps. Not tonight. But soon you will wake in the dark, words on your lips you don't remember learning. A name. Maybe yours. Maybe one you know. And once it is spoken, you will not be able to unspeak it. The Drevlins will have you then, not as prey, but as chorus. The last realization. Here is the truth you must accept. The Drevlins were never a family. They were a method, and methods survive, in whispers, in erasures, in hums, in games, in you. This story was not history, it was initiation. And by reading this far, you have already taken the first step below. Listen closely now. Do you hear it? The hum at the edge of silence? That is them. That is you. That is the continuity of what began in soil and cellar and never ended. You are not above. You were never above. You are already below.